The last embers of the campfire hissed and popped, flinging tiny defiant sparks into the vast, indifferent darkness of the forest. 4 faces, illuminated by the dying orange glow, leaned in. It's the perfect setting for a story, isn't it? The deep woods, the crackling fire, the shared, unspoken agreement to be a little bit scared. But the story I'm about to tell you isn't about some monster with claws and fangs that lurks in the shadows. It's about the monsters that wear the faces of your friends. It happened to a man named Elias. He was part of a tight-knit group of 4 friends, the kind of bond forged in the fires of university and kept alive through years of weddings, birthdays, and the quiet, mundane moments in between. There was Liam, the charismatic, boisterous leader of their little pack. Chloe, the sharp, witty one with a laugh that could cut through any tension. And Ben, the quiet, steady anchor of their group, always observing, always listening. And then there was Elias. Elias was the glue, the organizer, the one who remembered everyone's favorite drink and the anniversary of their first inside joke. He loved his friends dearly, but a small, persistent part of him had always felt like he was watching them from behind a thin pane of glass. He was in the group, but not quite of it. It was a foolish, insecure thought, he knew, but it lingered, a ghost at the feast of their friendship. This year, for their annual reunion, Elias had found the perfect place. A sleek, modern cabin nestled deep in a remote old-growth forest, a good 3-hour drive from the nearest town. It was called the Stillness, a name that promised peace and seclusion. The online photos showed a minimalist marvel of glass, dark wood, and polished concrete, a stark island of modernity in a sea of ancient, untamed wilderness. He'd booked it for a long weekend, a 4-day escape from the noise of their lives. Their arrival was everything he'd hoped for. Hugs were exchanged, bags were dropped, and the city's tension seemed to melt away with the setting sun. Liam, ever the front man, immediately claimed the master bedroom with its floor-to-ceiling window overlooking a deep, wooded ravine. Chloe popped a bottle of Prosecco she'd brought, her laughter echoing in the cabin's open-plan living space. Ben, true to form, was already quietly unpacking the groceries, arranging everything with a calm, satisfying precision. Elias felt a familiar warmth spread through his chest. These were his people. The glass pane felt thinner than ever. The first day was a blur of happy nostalgia. They hiked a trail that snaked along a babbling creek, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. They played board games, the competition, fierce and friendly. As night fell, they gathered around a crackling fire pit on the stone patio, roasting marshmallows and trading stories. It was during one of these stories that the first flicker occurred, a tiny, almost imperceptible glitch in the fabric of their reality. Liam was in his element, recounting a disastrous camping trip from their university days. "So there I am," he boomed, his hands gesturing wildly, covered, head to toe in mud, with a raccoon making off with our last packet of sausages. And Ben, you absolute legend, you just look at me, deadpan, and you say..." Liam paused for dramatic effect, a grin spreading across his face. Elias grinned too, waiting for the punchline he knew was coming. Ben's legendary dry wit was the stuff of group lore. He'd said, well, at least he has good taste. But Liam's face went strangely blank for a half second, a flicker of nothing. Then the grin snapped back into place, a little too wide this time. "And you say, that's a real pickle, isn't it?" Silence. Chloe let out a small, hesitant laugh. "What? No, he didn't. He said the thing about the raccoon having good taste. Liam blinked, his smile unwavering. Right. Good taste. That was it. He laughed, a loud, booming sound that didn't quite reach his eyes, and then seamlessly continued with the story, as if nothing had happened. Elias stared at him. It wasn't just that Liam had gotten the line wrong. It was the way he'd gotten it wrong. The momentary blankness, the forced recovery. It was like watching an actor forget their line and then improvise badly. And Ben just sat there, poking the fire with a stick, a serene, placid smile on his face. The old Ben would have jumped in with a sarcastic comment, would have ribbed Liam mercilessly for messing up the story. This Ben did nothing. A cold knot tightened in Elias's stomach. He told himself he was being ridiculous. They'd had a bit to drink. Memories get fuzzy. It was nothing. He forced a laugh and took a long swig of his beer, the unease sticking in his throat. The next day, the flickers became more frequent, more insistent. They were playing a card game, a complicated one they'd spent an entire summer mastering years ago. Chloe, who had a mind like a steel trap for rules and strategy, suddenly seemed completely lost. She kept asking basic questions, her brow furrowed in a caricature of confusion. "Wait, so the red 7 beats the black 8? She asked, for the third time. "Only if a Tuesday is played on a Wednesday, Chloe," Liam joked, but his voice had that same hollow echo as the night before. Elias watched her. Chloe was competitive. She hated losing, and she never ever forgot the rules. Yet here she was, playing like a novice, a placid smile on her face every time she made a blunder that cost her the round. It was a performance of incompetence, and it was deeply, profoundly unsettling. Later that afternoon, Elias was in the kitchen with Ben, washing up after lunch. They stood side by side at the large, stainless steel sink, the silence comfortable, as it always was with Ben. Elias decided to test the waters, to see if he was truly going crazy. "Hey, do you remember that time we all went to that terrible karaoke bar for my 21st? He asked, keeping his tone casual. Ben turned to him, his hands still in the soapy water. He had a warm, gentle smile. "Of course, you sang Total Eclipse of the Heart. You were magnificent." Elias's blood ran cold. He had never, in his entire life, sung karaoke. He was terrified of singing in public. It was Liam who had belted out a truly atrocious, unforgettable rendition of that very song. It was one of their most cherished, often repeated stories. "No, Ben," Elias said slowly, his heart starting to pound. "I didn't. Liam did." Ben's smile didn't falter. It was as if his facial muscles were disconnected from the part of his brain that was processing the information. "Right. Liam, of course. It was a great night." He turned back to the sink, humming a tuneless, repetitive little melody. The glass pane between Elias and his friends was no longer there. It had been replaced by a wall of thick, soundproof ice. He was on one side, and on the other were these things, these perfect, smiling imitations. Paranoia began to consume him. He started watching them, really watching them, and the details were a cascade of wrongness. The way Liam's laugh always peaked at the same decibel, a recorded loop. The way Chloe would tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture he'd seen her do 1,000 times. But now it was mechanical, repetitive, performed every few minutes, regardless of whether any hair was out of place. The way Ben would nod in agreement, a steady rhythmic bob that was just a little too perfect, a little too even. They were like incredibly advanced AI, running a friendship simulation. They had all the data, years of shared memories, jokes, and affections. But they were processing it without any genuine understanding. They were hitting all the right notes, but there was no music. That evening, a storm rolled in. Rain lashed against the huge glass walls of the cabin, and the wind howled through the trees. The power, predictably, went out. They were plunged into a flickering, uncertain world of emergency lanterns and phone flashlights. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted. The imitations didn't seem to mind the dark. If anything, they seemed more at ease. Their smiles in the shifting, shadowy light were grotesque. "Let's tell ghost stories," Chloe chirped, her voice unnaturally bright in the oppressive darkness. Liam immediately agreed. "Brilliant idea. I'll go first." And he launched into a story, a generic, cliché-ridden tale about a haunted asylum that he'd clearly pulled from some forgotten corner of the internet. It was delivered with gusto, with all the right pauses and dramatic whispers, but it was utterly soulless. Elias felt a surge of desperate, reckless courage. "My turn," he said, his voice tight, as soon as Liam finished. The three faces turned to him, their expressions identical masks of pleasant anticipation. The shadows cast by the lantern hollowed out their eyes, making them look like skulls. "This is a story," Elias began, his voice trembling slightly, about a man who goes away with his three best friends to a remote cabin in the woods. He loves his friends. He's known them for years, but when he gets there, he starts to realize something is wrong. They look like his friends, and they sound like his friends, but they're not. They're empty. He looked from face to face. Liam's smile remained fixed. Chloe's head was tilted in an attitude of polite interest. Ben was nodding, that slow, rhythmic, horrifying nod. They weren't reacting. They weren't angry or confused or concerned. They were just receiving data. He notices little things at first. Elias continued, his voice growing stronger, fueled by a terrifying certainty. They get the details wrong. Shared memories, the punchlines to old jokes. Their gestures are repetitive, like a program on a loop. Their laughter doesn't reach their eyes. They're just copies, fakes, mimics. The only sounds were the drumming of the rain and the howl of the wind. The three figures around him were perfectly still, their smiles unwavering in the lantern light. The man gets scared. He's trapped in the middle of nowhere with these things that are wearing the faces of the people he loves most in the world. He doesn't know what they are or what they want. He only knows that he's utterly, completely alone. Elias stopped. His heart was a jackhammer against his ribs. He had thrown a grenade into the middle of their cozy, simulated friendship, and they hadn't even flinched. Then Liam spoke. His voice was calm, devoid of its usual boisterous warmth. It was flat, neutral. "That's a good story, Elias. Very creative." Chloe nodded, her mechanical hair-tuck gesture seeming to stutter for a moment. "Yes, very atmospheric." Ben said nothing. He just kept nodding. Nod, nod, nod. And in that moment, Elias understood. This wasn't a test. It wasn't a game. They were confirming his observations. They were letting him know that he was right. The charade was over, but the simulation would continue, now with an added layer of psychological torment. They wanted him to know. They wanted him to watch. The rest of the night was a waking nightmare. They insisted on finishing the game of cards from that afternoon. Elias played along, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold his cards. They played perfectly now. Every move was calculated, every play flawless. They didn't speak. They just played, their smiling faces a triptych of terror in the gloom. When it was time for bed, Elias barricaded his bedroom door with a chair. He didn't sleep. He sat on the floor, his back against the door, listening. For hours, there was nothing but the sound of the storm. Then, just as the rain began to subside, he heard it, a soft, rhythmic scraping sound from the hallway. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. He held his breath, straining to listen. The sound was moving, coming closer to his door. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. It stopped right outside. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise itself. He imagined one of them out there, just standing, smiling at the door, waiting. What were they scraping? A fingernail? A knife? Then came the whisper. It was a chorus of voices, a synthesized blend of Liam's, Chloe's, and Ben's, speaking as one. The words seeped through the wood of the door, coiling into his ear like a serpent. "We know you're awake, Elias. We just want to make sure you're comfortable. We're so glad you're here. You complete the set." A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over him. He scrambled away from the door, pressing himself into the far corner of the room, his eyes wide in the darkness. They didn't try the handle. They didn't bang on the door. They just whispered. For what felt like hours, they whispered. Their voices a continuous, monotonous loop of pleasantries and twisted inside jokes. Their words, stripped of all warmth and meaning, rendered into weapons of psychological warfare. They whispered about his insecurities, the ones he thought he'd hidden so well. Always the observer, weren't you, Elias? Always watching. Now you have something truly interesting to watch. They whispered about his role as the group's glue. You held us all together. It's an important job. The simulation runs much more smoothly with you here. The data is so much richer. Dawn eventually broke, a sickly gray light that filtered through the window. The whispering stopped. Exhausted, terrified, and running on pure adrenaline, Elias knew he had to escape. He waited until he heard the sounds of them moving about the cabin. The clink of coffee mugs, the murmur of their simulated morning chatter. They were resetting, starting a new day's performance. He didn't have a plan. He just knew he had to get to his car. He slowly, silently, moved the chair from his door. He cracked it open. The hallway was empty. He could see them in the main living area, their backs to him, Chloe pouring coffee, Liam staring out the window, Ben wiping down the already immaculate concrete countertop. He crept out. Every creak of the floorboards was a gunshot in the silence. He made it to the main door, his hand shaking as he reached for the handle. "Leaving so soon, Elias?" The voice was right behind him. It was Chloe's. He spun around. The three of them were standing there, side by side, no more than 10 feet away. They weren't smiling anymore. Their faces were utterly blank, their eyes like the emotionless lenses of a camera. "The weekend isn't over," Liam's voice stated, flat and cold. "We still have another day of friendship scheduled. We're going to play charades after breakfast," Ben's voice added. "You always loved charades." Elias didn't answer. He fumbled with the lock. his fingers slick with sweat. He threw the door open and bolted out into the damp, misty morning. He didn't look back. He ran across the wet stone patio, his bare feet slipping, and sprinted across the gravel driveway towards his car. He expected them to follow, to run after him, but they didn't. He risked a glance over his shoulder as he fumbled for his keys. They were standing in the doorway of the beautiful modern cabin, perfectly still, watching him. 3 silent, motionless figures against the dark interior. They didn't need to chase him. Their work was already done. He got the car started, the engine roaring to life, and slammed it into reverse, spraying gravel everywhere. As he sped down the long, winding dirt road, away from the stillness, away from the things that wore his friends' faces, he felt not relief, but a new, more insidious kind of horror. The story doesn't end there, you see. Elias made it back to the city. He went to the police, but what could he say? That his friends were acting weird? That they were getting memories wrong? They sent a patrol car to the cabin a day later, of course. They found it empty, spotlessly clean. No sign of a struggle, no sign of anyone. Liam, Chloe, and Ben were gone. They were officially listed as missing persons. Elias tried to move on, but the simulation had followed him. The horror wasn't in the cabin, it was in his mind. He would see strangers on the street with Liam's walk. He'd hear a woman in a cafe with Chloe's laugh and have to run out, his coffee untouched. He'd see Ben's quiet smile on the face of a bus driver, and his breath would catch in his throat. He was forever scanning faces, looking for the glitch, the flicker, the telltale sign of the mimic. He pushed everyone away, unable to trust that anyone was real. The whispers from the hallway had become his constant companions, the soundtrack to his lonely, paranoid existence. Because the real horror of Elias's story, the part that should chill you to the bone around this dying fire, is not that he was trapped in a cabin with monsters. It's that he escaped, but he took the cage with him. He was left in a world that felt like a perfect, soulless copy of the one he'd known, forever questioning the reality of every handshake, every smile, every kind word. Forever the observer, watching from behind the glass, utterly, completely alone. And the worst part? The question that will haunt him until the day he dies. Was he the only one who ever made it out? Or was he just the only one who noticed?